welcome to the after lunch hour of the 13th workshop on the social implications of national security. We've had a great morning talking with our keynote professor Ben Schneiderman, Guy Huntington, Pat Scannell, and numerous others. And this afternoon we're going to change tack a bit. I think this morning we talked about design, implementation, and this afternoon we're going to be talking about digital ecosystems, the rights of citizenry, new technologies, and social implications. So our first speaker up this afternoon is Professor Eusebio Scornavacca from the University of Baltimore, and he's going to be talking about the fable of the boiling frog.
There you go. So thank you, Katina, for the invitation. I really enjoyed this conversation. So let's talk about digital ecosystems and the fable of the boiling frog. Just a quick disclaimer, if anyone is worried, no frogs were harmed in the making of this presentation. But to begin, we need to really try to understand, when you think about some of the effects of us being connected, is really think about some of the key technological enablers that actually developed in very different paths and allowed the creation of this ecosystem. So the first one, you have the diffusion of the internet, basically taking a unique and path of diffusion and development. Then you have wireless telecommunications, especially we start having data being transmitted by wireless medium, and then you have when the two of them meet, that you basically see the first generation. This was basically when I was back in Japan in 2000, seeing the first devices that were able to actually have the internet in your pocket somehow. So what you see is an increasing system convergency. That means you have a number of different technologies that start to converge and get into a continuous temporospatial access that creates fluidity. Not only fluidity of us, doesn't matter where you are, when you are, to have that connectedness, but also the types of channels that you have, whether it is, for example, your email or Facebook or your access to Google. It doesn't matter the device that you have. On the beginning, it was mostly device specific. The other thing that's important that sometimes we forget about is that, market perspective brings a lot. It's not only into it. It's not only what is possible to do, but actually at what cost. So what I would like to do is to invite you to look beyond the shiny box, which means instead of focusing on the disruptor, which is the cell phone, the smartwatch, or the whatever new craze it is, let's think about the actual disruptors. That happens is not the key, but the disruption that actually is created by or enabled by those disruptors. So one of the things that I normally do, but people understand the impact of the ecosystem, is to understand that we basically worked on 3 different stages of development. The first one is actually the stationary stage. So if you think about this graphic here, we have space, and then you have time. And then on space and time, you can have, for example, that red line. Let's say that's Katina's movement in space and time, and you can see the yellow area on the top is basically what you had your workstation back at UTS, right? So what meant that if you wanted to send an email to me when I was living in New Zealand across the Tasman, the only place in time and space that you had access to that tool was your workstation at UTS in Sydney. The next stage, Katina got let's think about a Zenith 286 with a 14 kbps modem by Telstra, right? Which means, we're talking about very slow but connected internet at home. So you can see that you have a new development here, that her home is actually a place where she could send you a email, but also you had a diffusion of internet kiosks or internet cafes. Some countries they call LAN houses. Don't ask me why. But what happens is you start to see a growth, if you think about time and space, of the availability of the tool for you to do those tasks. Then you get your first phone, let's say a Nokia that was with WAP and email enabled. And basically what it does, that expands dramatically in the relation of time and space, your ability to have access to a information technology tool that allows you to complete the task. So if you think about all this evolution, the actual disruptive aspect of it was our relation of time, space, interactivity, and task support. Whether the task is a hedonic task, I want to get amused, I want to hear a joke, or it's a task that is basically utilitarian. I want to know what's the temperature outside, or I want to know if how is traffic to actually go home. So basically what we see here, you see that advances of wireless connectivity combined with media convergence. So if you think about the mobile phone or the smartphone, there was a point of time, especially one of the reasons why Apple was so successful and then Nokia lost their market was because they had a media device called the iPod that basically they connected and it would become also an internet device. While Nokia had mobile phones, they were trying to work as media basically stations. So you have this shift from actually phones to actually media sets that allow you to interact with that. So what you have here is a number of different technologies or a number of different drivers, which is the media convergency, the technology portability, all the data analytics and artificial intelligence that you can think about, basically creating this ubiquitous, pervasive ecosystem that allows basically two things. One, allows us to support our individuals or through those media systems to do different tasks, or whether these tasks can be beneficial or not, that's a different story. But also, you have now a new generation or a new type of technology, which is IoT, Internet of Things, that is enhancing the affordances of the object. So if I think of a bottle here, once you connect that bottle, you have a cyber-physical system that not only the affordances of the bottle, that is to, but to be able to have water, to be able to contain that, to be able to transport, but then you start to create new affordances such as to know how the water, if it's good, how long it's been there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what you see here, that the key technological characteristics that you see are basically connected, interactive, embedded, and smart. So once we understand the creation of this ecosystem, we are able to actually see three key digital disruptors. The first one is digitalization and decoupling. So function no longer is constrained by form. I did in Toulouse on Monday an exercise that was very interesting. I asked the students to look at a book and then look at an e-book. So the physical book versus the digital book. And I asked them to do a list of the affordances of the book. Most of them, the first thing that they did, they said, well, is to store information. And then we start to think, and it could be a decoration piece, could be something that was helping. I was making a joke that a student had a table that was uneven, so it could work as a level for the table. The other one was showing off the phrase that was reading Tolstoy in Russian. So all those things are actually driving a number of affordances that is actually not necessarily transferable when you go to the digital element. So the first one, we're looking at the number of affordances. Once you create a digital, you eliminate a number of those affordances that are associated with the physical aspect of the artifact, but you also create a number of new affordances, such as hypertext, such as searchable, such as easy reproduction, and so forth. So what you have here is that you have the process of virtualization and decoupling of format and form. The second thing comes in terms of ubiquity and embeddedness. That's basically you see that the ecosystem is present with of course with limitations, but you think about everywhere, everyone, and everything. So basically what you have here is that pervasive nature of the ecosystem, either through media devices or IoT devices. But the most important one is actually the network effect and generativity that it does by being intrinsically connected. So what it does, everything that happens into the ecosystem can easily create this snowball network effect that's easily propagated. But at the same time, that ability to be connecting things that were never in natural circumstances together before, you have a combinatorial complexity that drives an anticipated level of innovation. I usually tease Katina about as a being someone of Italian origin. The Hawaiian pizza was actually invented by a Greek, right, in Ontario, which would be that sort of mixing the ideas and so forth within Italian settings. I can guarantee you would have constrained innovation, right? So that's one of the key elements here that you see that it allows us an incredible level of innovation because of the intrinsically connected. So does it really change things? Well, let's have a look at a few things. Think about the context, the boundaries, how we see productivity. The idea that you have a means of production, you have a tool, we are more productive. But if you see some of those pictures here, first you see a disruption of time. Is it 1 a.m. or 1 p.m.? Where are we? The second one, this is a picture of the House of Representatives where you see people playing solitaire and so forth. So the idea is that that tool was able to actually have people to be more productive, and that tool was actually being a source of distraction. The other thing, if you see those two pictures here, this is a setting that people would work. That you see that constraint of one screen and on a desk. The moment you left your desk, you had to go to the bathroom, for example. That availability of the tool was actually interrupted. In this case here, you see at least 1, 2, 3, 4 different screens with different media systems interacting. If you think about the connectivity, the number of channels is actually almost infinite on that. But the most important thing, when I talk to audiences around the world and I ask them, have you ever responded a message while on the toilet? Guess what? Very hard to find someone who never did. So what you see here, back in 2004, we already had in New Zealand in that case, in a classroom, 1.3 devices, 1.3 mobile devices per student. So you see that idea of separating the human and the it's almost like there's some research that we did into extended self. The device becomes an extension of the individual. So if you think about user behavior, you see also some changes, and also in social norms. You see digital immigrants, anyone who knows the world before internet, behavior in a certain way, having cognitive abilities in a certain way, and then you have digital natives that basically don't understand. And my kids are excellent example that I think of how they behave. They don't really understand the world without a connectivity, without the digital ecosystems. So their expectations, even the way they solve problems, is actually principally different from mine, even though I am a person that is extremely, comfortable in understanding technology. So the other thing, if you look into social norms, you see here the rupture of time, space, and interaction. You see this group of young people here sharing the same place in time and space. However, cognitively, they are being connected through their devices. So you see the rupture that, they have the opportunity. Why do we have parties? Isn't that for socialize? You're actually missing that opportunity by the affordances of the ecosystem. One of the other issues that we have is what I call data rich, information poor, and knowledge miserable. There is an assumption the more data that you have, more information you have, and more knowledge you have. And that's not true. You see that basically you have a number of technologies that you see data driven, you see amounts of data, but actually failing to transform that data into valuable information, into knowledge. You see a lot of implementations into companies that are basically technology driven. How can we put a sensor there, and that sensor there creates a data? The question is not even looking on ethical issues of that, but it's actually, even though what you do with the data, how that data actually creates benefits to the stakeholder is not very clear, because the end game is actually to collect that data, to have that data. So there's a fascination on that. They're not really understanding clearly how being data rich doesn't translate to be knowledge rich. So a lot of times you see into value chains, into the implementation of systems, the failure to actually have that translated into, say, positive outcomes to stakeholder and to society. The other thing becomes when you think about the pervasiveness of the ecosystem, is how does actually digital footprint creates the cyber physical reality, and then automatically think about Michael, ubervalence, the traceability, the ethics, privacy, security, and other elements that are intrinsically related to the idea that we're connected and you're creating this footprint of basically of data and that can easily be used as an element to create value and benefit your life, but paradoxically can actually be creating harm. So what about the boiling frog? What happened with the boiling frog? Let's talk about the boiling frog. The pervasiveness of the ecosystem is nurtured this state of perpetual connectivity. And what it's really doing is blurring the traditional or what we normally understood boundaries of human and machine interaction. We have, when Katina talks about the implants, you start to see the human being as a cyber physical system, which is one step, I would say ahead of actually carrying those devices or putting to our wrists and so forth. So what is interesting that normally you think about this in developed economies, you think about this in settings of high tech, and that's not true. This is actually a few projects that I've been doing, and the first picture here is on the outskirts of Dali in the northeast of China. Basically, you see there's dirt and they're selling dried mushrooms, but actually the whole payment system is actually being enabled by mobile devices. So basically, it's a market that is basically cashless. The other element that is interesting here, this is in Brazil, basically close to a slum where people are recycling materials. And guess what? They're using actually heavy, I would say, they have a co-op of recyclers. And you're thinking people from slums collecting basically garbage. And they're using that to actually coordinate the collection and actually the materials that it basically is an ERP simplified version of it. And this one here is in Ghana, in Accra. The entire section of the market is dedicated to the good old mobile phone or the smartphone. So you have what is interesting that if you went there, say 10, 15 years ago, you would see there's a section for clothing, there's a section for food, and actually the relevance of this technology to society that is so high that actually a good part of the market is only serving to fixing phones, selling phones, accessories, and so on and so on. So what it does, it creates a level of technological dependence that the diffusion of those technologies starts to change our portfolio of skills that we need to survive. So, you see this is a Tesla, and this is actually a Boeing airplane. I mean, you start to actually see those systems, the complexity of it, and actually changing our skills. I have an Aussie friend here in the US. She has a manual car key. So they broke into her car, and they couldn't take the car. Do you know why? Because they couldn't drive stick shift.
Yeah.
Right? So I say probably it's a more secure car to have here in the US. So what you see is that the incremental technological dependence starts to substitute skills. I ask the audiences all around the world, and I say, who can actually light fire without using a match or using a lighter, just using sticks and very often only people who were scouts, either Boys or Girl Scouts, or people who were into the military are able to have that skill, which was a skill that we needed as humans to survive, but it had a number of technologies that became ubiquitous and embedded in our lives that skill became basically no longer vital, and then we start to acquire other skills in doing other technologies. So we have to understand that dependence is shifting our portfolio of skills, and what do we do? For example, processing data from multiple, it's actually one of the things that Pat talked about a lot, is that how fast technology is changing and our capacity to adapt is not as fast. So that's a very interesting thing. So what it does really, it paves a way to a paradox of technology. Basically, if you think about the smartphone, it can be extremely emancipating, but at the same time slaving. What you have here is that at the same time that we can use this technology to learn, to interact, to socialize, to do a lot of good things, to solve problems, the same technology, the same vessel can actually result in a number of behaviors and outcomes that are actually harmful, such as addiction. And we did some studies on that. And the picture that I brought you is actually from Kenya, where right now there is an epidemic of actually gambling that young people, especially boys, are gambling even their school fees on the Premier League in UK. And you have, for example, that advertised Let's Play, which is basically a gambling site. Now they're trying to restrain the use of that, but also the advertising into the country. So the same vessel that delivered, the ability to read and learn is actually also creating social issues such as gambling addiction. The other thing that is very interesting to look at here is, for example, a project that I'm doing in Finland, that we are using the same vessel that is actually creating what we call digital consumers. There are basically consumers that are actually getting debt. They're actually consuming more than they should, given that you have algorithms pushing, there's a deal here, buy this, buy that, recommending. And actually, we're working on using interventions or to learn, to have young people there to learn about financial literacy and actually how to be a more savvy consumer into this ecosystem. So the hectic diffusion of these technologies, it does bring a tremendous amount of implications to society, and I think they should be considered of public interest. One, so you have those technologies, the implications of that goes beyond to see the person as a consumer, but see the person as a member of society. So what you do have here is an example that we could look is social media and artificial intelligence. Social manipulation can be really easily done, and we're seeing more and more of that, especially in the political arena. That you can use AI-powered technologies to basically develop target marketing, knowing who we are, what we do, what we like, even what channel do we prefer to receive. So you have a number of elements here that makes this technology very, I would say, appealing to us. But also the thing is, it creates basically a greenhouse effect of information. We only feed information to people that are things like us. So the idea that brings different perspectives is actually not necessarily true. The other thing you think about is the misalignment that may exist between the artificial technology goals and the human goals. Most of the time, if you think about artificial technology, the goal there is performance gain. But that performance gain not necessarily can lead to actually positive outcomes to humans. So you can actually have this misalignment that I do believe can bring quite a dangerous situation, that actually the effects of this technology are being harmful to people and to society. One example is discrimination. Since you tell that you want an algorithm, for example, using machine learning, that should increase performance, so then the algorithm learns that depending on your gender or your religion or your race, you're less or more likely to pay. So you actually, what the algorithm is doing is trying to increase the performance of basically a loan or something like that. So we have to actually make sure that these devices are actually, or these artifacts are being able to have the ethical, I would say, framing that we as a society, we want when we are making those decisions. So the issue that you have here really is that there is an illusion in many cases. They say, oh, I have control, I can switch off that control, or I don't give that information. We know that using AI systems by proxy, I know by your name and place of birth and actually your movements, I can know exactly what church do you go on Sundays, or if you don't. I know, what kind of your probability of being of a certain nationality or a certain race or a certain ethnic group. Is actually, there is enough information that you don't need to disclose directly, but indirectly, AI systems can easily find that. So what you have here, you can actually create the settings, not only an invasion of privacy, but depending in some countries, you can think this directly as a form of social oppression. So the question is, are we in having a new digital divide? Usually when you think about digital divide, you think about people with technology and without. But I think we need to think a bit further from that. Once the technology is available, once the connectivity is available, we may have people that understand the effect of algorithms and people who don't. So what you can say is that we go to the third, I would say, stage of digital divide. Access, skills, and awareness. So the same time that you see that studies are actually suggesting that more and more people they trust algorithms and platforms than actually governments and civic society. And one example that I usually laugh about, which is quite funny, I ask people, especially when I'm talking to younger students, I ask, will you, if your parents suggest you to go on a date with a boy and a girl, how do you take that? Oh, hell no. But if Tinder tells you that, oh yeah. So they trust the judgment of the algorithm of Tinder. I remember when I was back in Arizona a few months ago, there was a couple of chaps walking and one was saying, can you imagine the next swipe can be the mother of your children?
Yeah.
So that sentence is stuck in my head because you see that you see the effects of those algorithms into people's lives. So one of the elements that you have more and more people relying on algorithms to make their decisions rather than relying on tools of deep thinking and so forth. So the other thing is interesting that similar to, for example, nanotechnologies, if you ask people, do you use nanotechnologies? Most people say no, but actually most of them do on shampoos and other consumer products like that. It's the same thing if you ask people about AI. Most people they are unaware of it. So what is interesting is that while you see that people are concerned about the rise of machines and so forth, at the same time people give consent to data for a minimum trade-off. FaceApp is a good example of that. That people are giving their biometric data for maybe see how they look like in 20 years. Like a joke, sit and wait, you will know, right? Eat well and exercise, and even better.
Yes.
Right? I would be happy with that. So the key point here is that I believe we should start, clearly through advocating for algorithms that are fair, accountable, transparent, interpretable, that basically humans can understand that, and that the decision process the algorithm is coming that's supposedly bringing more performance to us is clearly understandable to us, that we can trust it, that it's actually doing good for humans and for society. So when I talk about digital literacy initiatives, shouldn't only be limited to access and skill, but we should promote in society that understanding of evaluating the outcomes of a always connected life. So which means that all the initiatives that we have to have more access to information, more access to tools as technology and so forth, should also come with the education piece. The same thing when you look at the effects of, for example, social currencies, that people have access to microcredit without financial literacy. Guess what? You're actually giving basically a gateway for loan sharks to prey on actually people on very low income. So you need to understand that when you're diffusing that into many settings, that part of understanding the outcomes, what means to have that tool in my hands is extremely important. So to wrap up and make sure that I did on time.
You're amazing with that interruption.
Yeah. So the key elements that I want to bring is, well, the first one is understanding that the development, but also the pervasive expansion of the digital ecosystem creates an amazing level of disruption. Any of those technologies, as being paradox technologies, can create extremely good, but at the same time, amazing harm. The key element here, I don't believe that we should be, either left or right or against or in favor of it, but we should really try to understand and put some thought into it. How can we actually use this technology to promote positive outcomes? Of course, going beyond performance gains. The key element here is that most of the time the technology is offered, basically saying, if you use this, you get performance gains. We got a cheaper parking spot. You do this, you do that, and you have more fun, whatever it is. So a lot of times we don't think much beyond the performance gain because, to be honest, the performance gain can be very sexy, in the sense very appealing to us. So we should start asking, what's the impact of this technology and what value it actually creates to society beyond the performance, right? Instead of asking, will technology do this more effectively? Will technology be better than a human. I think the key question is, should technology be in charge of this? And you can think about, for example, sentencing in the judicial system. You can think about decisions that sometimes can be of life and death, or even those simple decisions: who am I going to date this Friday evening? I'm married, so I can't do that. But the key element here is, we have to start asking ourselves: should technology be in charge of that? So I think one of the key elements here is, as we diffuse these technologies, as the ecosystems expand, we should be part of, civil society. When you think about education systems, when you think about consumer advocating groups, when you think about, government, private enterprises, we should really be trying to understand the consequences and the associated risks of the diffusion of this technology. And the key element here is for us to be able to together decide whether we feel comfortable with that, so we can understand clearly what's the trade-off that we are having from the affordances and the benefits that the digital ecosystem provides in relation to the risks that come with it. And those risks are as clear as the benefits and the performance, because the marketing people, trust me, they were not talking about the risks, right? So then we can really create a much more smart, inclusive, sustainable society, and not end up as the boiling frog. So that's the final thought. Our inability to understand technology and perceive its effect on our society and on ourselves is one of the greatest, if most subtle, problems of an age that has been so heavily influenced